to the mule too. Did you want to leave a little bit of red herrings for the mule to set it up early on?
Yes.
How did you have the four books envisioned even prior to writing chapter 54, or did the four
Yes.
books themselves also? Okay.
Before I started, I said the four main characters, and they're going to be named after the four main characters. Paulie is the first book to set up the whole book. Then we get the coming threat of the Foundation, and that's the whole mule section. Then then we get the turn to Big Frank. And it should be noted that the first three books make up basically the first half of the book, and book four is basically the second half. Book three is Big Frank, and we get Big Frank's mistress, his wife. We learn about Big Frank's relationship with his daughter. Big Frank is sort of becoming more and more reliable. We have, I think it's in maybe the second or the third book. We have that great long scene of Big Frank in the sneakers tied up on the telephone wires or whatnot. Um, we
Yes.
we find out about his childhood and religion. We find a little bit more about his family life and his brother Con Concerto, who he kills. And then we also then book four is just the Norwegian, but the Norwegian it's really dominated by chapter 54 and bit, and so even though the book is called The Norwegian and the Family, he's not the main character. Even though book four is called The Norwegian, he's really, I mean, we find more out about him. But as I was writing, I kept saying to myself, you know what? I can't. I don't want to tell. The Norwegian has to be sort of mythic because the Norwegian is going to appear in other works. Big Frank, I could go more deeply into because just like Gino Vincetti is only in the Vincetti Brothers, Big Frank is only going to be in Vincetti Brothers and a Norwegian in the Family. He'll be talked about, but we're never going to see an appearance of Big Frank again. Paulie, there are certain types of characters. Paulie, Bit, the Norwegian are characters that I can use as devices in other books. Big Frank is someone though that I'm coring deeply into. The Mule is sort of like the character of Dario Sandoval in the earlier books of this quartet, in that we're never really going to know who the Mule is. The Mule will be positive. The Mule will have effects that go back centuries and will have effects far into the science fiction book future. But we'll never know who the Mule really is. His Brown book, which is based upon Mao's Little Red Book, Mao Zedong's Little Red Book, is his supposed work of philosophy, sort of Ayn Randian bullshit. And when we see some of the things that the foundation years are forced to read, we know that this guy has no fucking clue as to what, and he's insane. But his Brown book is going to play a part in developing this cult that ends up in outer space.
And since we're speaking about the four books, I think that harkens back to True Life in a way because each of the individual books I think gets better as it goes on. I mean,
Yeah.
Polly is the least of the books, and then the Mule, and then Big Frank, and then the Norwegian. Um, the, that very much shares the narrative with True Life. That said, I think that as cohesive a work as True Life was, this is even more cohesive in that the very beginnings of the book connect to everything. Do you see that too? I know we've talked many times
Yes,
about
I
how
said earlier, this is the greatest book ever, and it's the greatest written work ever that I've ever read by a mile. Everything went into it. That's not to say that, like I said, my last book has techniques that go beyond this, but in terms of the scope, in terms of throwing everything in the kitchen sink into this book, there's no more virtuosic display of writing ability than in this book. I do everything. Every known technique in prose is used in here in some way. Plus, I invented some other techniques. I take stuff from film. I take stuff from history. I take stuff from reality. I take stuff from other books, public domain books. I take so much and I mold it into something.
yeah. Then you have Godspeed John Glenn. This comes after the somewhat reveal of the mysterious mule.
Yeah.
Uh, this indicates the prostate scare that Polly has,
Yeah.
which
Oh, but
is at the same time you
let me
were
just say
having.
one thing. Hold on. it should be noted all four of the books in the New York Quartet have 64 chapters, which is 4 times 4 times 4, and there are 4 books. So you have 256 chapters, or 4 times 4 times 4 times 4, or 4 to the fourth power. 4 is important in this quartet, just as in my trilogies. Each of my trilogy books, the first 2 have 27 chapters, which is 3 times 3 times 3, and there'll be 3 books. So it's that I do a lot of little number games, and that's the most obvious one. And I just throw that out there because a lot of people talk about a lot of works of art with symbology and James Joyce and all this stuff. This book makes the collected works of James Joyce look like, a third grade crossword puzzle.
Yeah, numerologists can ejaculate to that for centuries. You have numerology all throughout your stuff. The 49 gallery is a good example in that 7 times 7, and that there's 7 sections. Yeah, so let's talk about Godspeed, John Glenn. This one was around the same time as your own prostate scare, correct? So it's an incident of taking real life events and incorporating them to that. And I even see some of the little sections here, rereading it again, that it connects to that essay that you wrote about your prostate scare as well.
Yeah, and that's one of the things that we talk about, organic stuff. For example, Jessica and I both use stuff that happens in our real lives during the course of writing a book. My accidental killing of a cat, a roadkill late last year, becomes the end to my spy book. The prostate stuff here ends up in this book, and that's why I made Paulie have a prostate issue. Someone has a hernia in this book. I forget who. I had a hernia around this time too.
Yeah, hers are more hidden than yours. Yours are more openly obvious if you've read anything of yours. Hers seem like they're kind of incorporated into the work, and that she's not looking to document her every piss and fart. Not that there's anything wrong with doing such. Yeah, it's the next chapter after that kind of leads into Enter Bit by Bit. So this is the first incident of Bit. It's interesting. Chapter 54, as absurdly long as it is, it's divided into 3 segments, and the first segment is almost 900,000 words, and then the first 2 are a page, and then I think only like a word or 2.
It's divided into 4 segments. It's divided into about 900,000 words, then 20,000 words, then just like a paragraph, and then 1 word.
Oh well, that okay.
And that one word ending is again a nod to the ending of Angela's Ashes by Frank McCourt. He has one chapter that ends with the word "tis," which becomes the title of his second memoir. And I did the same thing, but mine is much more organically woven into the structure of the book, and it's much more funny that the way it ends.
I think that this is this is the first instance that you will see of some of the public domain characters really taken to absurd lengths too. This is a section that is repeated many times, especially the interaction with Dennis Hopper, where he's peeing off on the side and whatnot.
And let me say, I did chapter 54 first, and then I took sections from chapter 54 as I was writing it and put them in different parts of the book. And as I went over 8, 9, 10, 12 times of chapter 54, I would change things. But when I took things out, like here in chapter 13, which is from chapter 54, it might be an earlier version. And so I have all of these things. And so it's repetition, but each iteration is slightly different. It might be slightly punctuated differently. It might have a few little quotations a little bit differently. It might just have a single word that's different. That has an important thing, both in chapter 54 and elsewhere. And the thing that happens here is by having this LSD section of Bit scattered throughout the book before and after the main section 54, chapter 54, it gives the idea that maybe this whole narrative is all part of a dream or part of Bit von Reinkel. So I have Bit von Reinkel's acid dream almost becoming within Manny Cole's manuscript. In essence, the way I use Manny Cole's manuscript is using Bit von Rheingold's acid trip to add another layer of dimension.